Hello, it's John Heaton, and today I'm going to have a crack at doing my top 10 Ringo Starr albums. I did do a Ringo Starr album ranking several years ago. The quality was poor and a few other things I didn't like about that video, so I thought I'd redo it again. Thanks for the prompt to do that, James Griffiths. Before I start, just a couple of things. The Blast From Your Past compilation album's not in scope, neither is this Starstruck. Quite an interesting compilation, came out in '89 on the Rhino label. With the front cover, which would have been the You Can't Fight Lightning original idea for the Stop and Smell the Roses album cover. This is an album from '77 with a few songs from Ringo on it called Scouse the Mouse. Extremely rare, but I didn't count that in my ranking. If you want to pick up a copy of this, you're talking well over £100, I think. So that was that. So without further ado, by the way, sorry if your favourites are not on here. These are just mine, the ones I turn to most often. They're all available on Spotify with the exception of the albums from the 76 to 78 period, for which for some reason Ringo has blanked, for no reason other than the fact maybe he can't remember those years too much. So number 10, we've got 1981's Stop and Smell the Roses, which got pretty much savaged at the time by the critics. Didn't sell well, but was very nice to have contributions from Paul and George less than a year after John's murder, and John would have actually contributed it himself if he hadn't been murdered. He'd already said he was going to give Nobody Told Me to Ringo, and also a song called Life Begins at 40. It's not to be, sadly. But a decent effort. Harry Nilsson's on there contributing the title track along with Ringo. They co-write that track, and there's a good strong version of Carl Perkins' Sure to Fall with guitar playing from Lawrence Juba, who at the time was still in Wings at the time, just about. They hadn't quite folded. Number 9, we've got Bad Boy, 1983. By this time, Ringo was struggling to get his records released, and I think this album only appeared in Canada, Brazil, and Germany, I think it was. So Fit to Be Tie-Dyed, you probably picked up a copy of it at the time. I remember having to get it on import in HMV. Not vastly expensive. HMV were pretty good at putting out imports copies for sale. Joe Walsh is overall all over that album, and my favourite tracks would be Hopeless and Be My Baby probably, and the opening track In My Car is pretty good. As with a lot of these albums, side 2, it goes down the hill a bit, and that, if it wasn't for that, this album would be higher on my list. And this is number 8. We've got Bad Boy from 1978, from Ringo's so-called lost period, which you can't remember. Well, there's a lot to recommend about this album, and most of it can be found on side 1. Again, Who Needs a Heart? Very strong opener, co-written by Vinnie Poncia and Ringo. Nice cover of an old ballad called Bad Boy, which I'm not sure who wrote. Lipstick Traces, an old 50s song, very well played. I think it's Dr. John on piano, although the musician credits here on this album are a bit kind of cryptic because they're all using pseudonyms like Guitar and Diesel and Push Alone. So, but I think it's Dr. John on piano. Heart on My Sleeve, very effective cover of the Gallagher and Lyle song. Where Did Our Love Go? Another cover, been covered by a few people over the years. And then Hard Times from Peter Skellern, open side 2, and that's pretty decent, nice ballad, Tonight, and then it goes downhill a bit. Otherwise, this album would have been stronger because I think side 1 was a bit of a cracker. Number 7, we've got Goodnight Vienna from '74, and this kind of suffers a bit from being the follow-up to Ringo and Richard Perry trying to reproduce the formula without quite the same results. There's still some strong material on here. There's only one Beatle, ex-Beatle, to lend his services, John Lennon, the other 2 not available. But Elton John turns up with Snookeroo, which is a very strong track, and No Song was a big hit single as well. Husbands and Wives, nice ballad of the Roger Miller ballad there. The title track Goodnight Vienna is okay, but it's not in the same league as I'm the Greatest for me, and just everything on that album kind of smacks as okay, it's good, but it's not as good as the previous one, where it would be very hard to be as good, but it's still a decent album. Number 6, this one was a lot higher on my list last time. Time Takes Time from 1992. When this album first came out, I played it to death. I thought it was a really great album, best since Ringo. And it's still great. I just don't go back to it as often, and I got a bit tired of maybe the singles, Don't Go Where the Road Don't Go and Weight of the World. But I still love Runaways and I Don't Believe You. and All in the Name of Love. That's probably my three favourites, and some very strong people backing him, like Andrew Gold is on here, and Jeff Lynne, and Brian Wilson turns up for the track In a Heartbeat. And yeah, very, very good album, and it's number 6. Number 5, we've got Ringo's Rotogravure from 76. Extremely strong side 1, Carl Grossman's song A Dose of Rock and Roll, very suited to Ringo's voice, which was a single, didn't do much. Hey Baby, cover of the old 1962 hit, I think it was. I think it's effective. Pure Gold, written by McCartney, very nice. Crying, co-written by Ringo, and then You Don't Know Me at All, very strong kind of disco-ish number. Arif Mardin's producing the album. There's a very good video for Hey Baby and a good video for You Don't Know Me at All, with Ringo having shaved off his head completely. Side 2, less good, but still some good stuff on both sides of that album. Number 4, it is Ringo the Fourth, and this album's leapt up in my estimation. For years I kind of maybe dismissed it a bit because Carr and Tyler dismissed it and the critics dismissed it and it didn't sell. But I think I've really come back to it. Maybe that's got something to do with meeting Tony Levin, the bass player who signed the album for me in Liverpool just a couple of months ago. And I think the ballads are particularly strong on here. Wings, Gave It All Up, It's No Secret, Gypsies in Flight, all co-written by Ringo with Vinnie Poncia. And Gave It All Up is particularly good. And some nice rockers. Can She Do It Like She Dances, an inspired choice of a cover. Sneaking Sally Through the Alley works well as well. I think one thing I can say about that album, and it flows very well, Arif Mardin's sequenced the album well, so that it's, I think it flows better than Goodnight Vienna and Rotogravure, and that's why it's higher on my list. And I've, as I say, I've somewhat rediscovered it in the last month or two. So number 3 we're up to now, Sentimental Journey, all the way back to the first solo album from 1970. And some very strong material on here, just covering old standards. Whispering Grass is covered. I was just listening to a version of that last night with Windsor Davis from the Dane Tough Hot Mum got to number 1 in England 1975. That was interesting. Anyway, back to this album, Bye Bye Blackbird, very good cover of that. Superior in my version to Paul's slightly slow Magdalene version of the same song on his Kisses on the Bottom album. I'm a Fool to Care is gorgeous, Dream is gorgeous. Some of the other songs less successful for Ringo's voice, but Let the Rest of the World Go By is just a lovely closer, and there's some big names producing various tracks on here, from Richard Perry to Quincy Jones to Maurice Gibb, Klaus Voormann, Paul McCartney, George Martin. Number 2 we're up to now, and I nearly put this at number 1, but I put it at number 2. It's Beaucoups of Blues from 1970, September. Pete Drake got talking to Ringo about their love of country music, and Ringo said, I wouldn't mind recording some songs, and Pete Drake invited him over to Nashville, and Ringo said, I don't want to spend 3 months away from home, and Pete Drake said, no, it'll only take a few days. And that's exactly what happened. Ringo flew over there. A lot of songs had been basically specially written for him by the local Nashville musicians, who all played on the album, and the backing group, the Jordanaires. And it's a very successful match. I think country music is very neatly suited to Ringo's voice, and he still should do a follow-up to this day to that. He's tried the odd country song over the years, but not a dedicated effort. And apparently, by all accounts, at these sessions, there was enough material laid down for a kind of archive edition. Not that we're going to get that, but we can dream. But that was number 2. I think it's really, really lasted well, and I go back to it very often. Number 1, I had to put this, really, because it's the album I go back to the most. It's the most heartwarming, probably one of the most heartwarming Beatles solo albums of them all, because we see the other 3 Beatles all contributing, and a kind of declaration of peace after all the hostilities of the early 70s, where they're all slagging each other off in public, and Ringo being the perfect guy to bring them all together, if not quite all 4 of them in the same studio at the same time. Managed to get John, George and Ringo in for I'm the Greatest together in Los Angeles, and Paul records his contributions in London, I believe. But, you know, George Harrison's all over this album, co-writing 2 tracks and writing a third. Various other people contribute, all trying to make Ringo produce you know, a great album and they succeed. Harry Nilsson's on here. I mentioned the other three Beatles, Mark Bolan, Klaus Voormann, Richard Perry doing a masterful job producing. So that was my number one, and this is my top 10. You can read that, and sorry if you didn't agree, but that's just my opinion. And well, thank you for watching, and we'll see you next time.